Chapter 1 of Down the Line with John Henry. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Laura. Down the Line with John Henry by Hugh McHugh. John Henry at the races.
I was anxious to make Clara Jane think that she was all the money, so I boiled out a few plunks, trotted over to the trolley, and rushed her to the racetrack. I'm a dub on the dope, but it was my play to be a wise boy among the skates on this particular occasion, and I went the whole distance. In the presence of my lady love, I knew every horse that ever pulled a harrow. Isn't it cruel how a slob will cut the guy ropes and go up in the air just because his baby is by his side? Me, to the mountain tops. Before the car got started, I was telling her how Pittsburgh Phil and I win $18,000 last summer on a fried fish they called Benzine. Then I confided to her the fact that I doped a turtle named Pink Toes to win the next day. But he went over the fence after a loose bunch of grass, and I lose $23,680. She wanted to know what I meant by dope, and I told her it generally meant a sour dream, but she didn't seem to grab. When we got to the track, they were bunching the bones for the first race, so I told Clara Jane I thought I'd crawl down to the ring and plaster 2,000 or 3,000 around among the needy. 2,000 or 3,000, and me with nothing but a 5-spot in my jeans and the return ticket money in that. "Are you really going to bet?" she asked. "Sure," I said. "I've got a pipe." "Well, I hope you won't smoke it near me. I hate pipes," she said. "All right. I'll take my pipe down to the betting ring and smoke it there," I said, and we parted good friends. In front of the grandstand I met Nash Martinetti. He was holding a bunch of poppies, and he picked out one in the first race and handed it to me. "A skinch," said Nash. "Go as far as you like." Then Ned Rose went into a cataplectic state and handed me the winner, by a block. It couldn't go wrong unless its feet fell out. "Here you are, John Henry, the real Petro," said Ben Roberts. "Play pump handle straight and place. It's the road to wealth, believe me. All the others are behind the hill." Every breezy boy I met had a different hunch, and they called me into the wharf and unloaded. I figured it out that if I had bet $5 on each good thing they gave me, I would have lost $400,000. Then I ducked under, sopped up a stein of root beer, and climbed up again to the hurricane deck. "Did you bet?" inquired Clara Jane. "Only $730, I said. "A mere bag o' shells." I leave a call for 7:30 every morning, and I suppose that's the reason I was so swift with the figures. "My, what a lot of money!" said the fair one. "Do point out the horse you bet on. I shall be awfully interested in this race. Carlo, you bad dog, lie down." I pointed out the favorite as the one I had my bundle on, and explained to Clara Jane that the only way it could lose was for some sore head to get out and turn the track around. Sure enough, the favorite galloped into port and dropped anchor 6 hours ahead of the other clams. I win over $2,200 conversation money, and Bonnie Bright Eyes was in a frenzy of delight. She wanted to know if I wasn't going to be awfully careful with it and save it up for a rainy day. I told her yes, but I expected we'd have a storm that afternoon. I had a nervous chill, for fear she'd declare herself in on the rake-off. But she didn't, so I excused myself and backed down the ladder to cash in. The boys were all out in the inquest room, trying to find out what killed the dead ones. Then they stopped apologizing to themselves and began to pick things out of the next race and push them up their sleeves. I ran across Harry Matty, and he took me up to the roof with a line of talk about a horse called Pretty Boy in the last race. "He'll be over 80-1, and it's a killing," Harry insisted. "Get down to the bank when the doors open and grab all you can. Take a satchel and the ice tongs and haul it away." I was beginning to be impressed. "Put a $5 on Pretty Boy," Harry continued, "and you'll find yourself dropping over in the Pierp Morgan class before sundown." "This may be a real Alexander," I said to myself. "Pretty Boy can stop in the stretch to do a song and dance and still win by a bunch of houses," Harry informed me. I began to think hard. "Don't miss it," said Harry. "It's a moral that if you play him, you'll die rich and disgraced like our friend Andy, the Hoot Mon." When I got back to the stand, I had a preoccupied air. The 5-spot in my jeans was crawling around and begging for a change of scene. When Clara Jane asked me how much I bet on the race just about to start, I could only think of $900. When she wanted to know which horse I pointed my finger at every toad on the track and said, "That one over there," it won. At the end of the third race, I was $19,218 to the good. Clara Jane had it down in black and white on the back of an envelope in figures that couldn't lie. She said she was very proud of me, and that's where my finish, bowed politely and stood waiting. She told me that it was really very wrong to bet any more after such a run of luck, and made me promise that I wouldn't wring another dollar from the trembling hands of the poor bookmakers. I promised, but she didn't notice that I had my fingers crossed. I simply had to have a roll to flash on the way home. So I took my lonely 5 and went out into the promised land after the nuggets Matty had put me wise to. It will be just like getting money from Uncle Peter, I figured. A small stake from Pretty Boy, I said to Wise Samuel, the bookmaker. "What's doing?" Wise Samuel gave me the gay look over. "Take the ferry for Sioux Falls," he said. "Nix on the smart talk, Sammy," I said. "Me for the Pretty Boy. How much?" "A bundle for the bite. You're on a cold plate," whispered Wise Samuel, but he couldn't throw me. "I don't see any derricks to hoist the price with," I tapped him. "Write your own ticket. Then you to the woods," said Sammy. In a minute my fiber was up, and I was on the card to win $500 when my cute one came romping home. I went back to Clara Jane, satisfied that in a few minutes I'd have a roll big enough to choke the tunnel. "Not having any money on this race, you can watch it with the least excitement, can't you?" she said. I said yes, and all the while I was scraping with a lump in my throat the size of my fist. When the horses got away with Pretty Boy in front, I started in to stand on my head, but changed my mind and swallowed half the program. Pretty Boy at the quarter. Me for Rector's till they put the shutters up. Pretty Boy at the half. Me down to Tiffany's in the morning dragging tiaras away in a dray. Pretty Boy at the 3/4 pole. Me doing the free library gag all over the place. But just as they came in the stretch, Pretty Boy forgot something and went back after it. The roach quit me cold at the very door of the safety deposit vaults. I was under the water a long time. Finally I heard Clara Jane saying, "Isn't it lucky you didn't bet on this race? I believe you would have picked that foolish-looking horse that stopped over there to bite the fence." "I'm done. Turn me over," I murmured, and then I rushed down among the ramblers and made a swift touch for the price of a couple of rides home. On the way back, Clara Jane made me promise again that I'd be awfully careful of my $19,218. I promised her I would. End of chapter 1.
Chapter 2 of Down the Line with John Henry by Hugh McHugh. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. John Henry with the Drummers.
It was a swift squad of sports that climbed into a coach and allowed themselves to be yanked over the rails in the direction of Chicago one morning last week. A bunch of brisk boys, believe me. Nick Dalrymple, Todd Stone, Slim Barnes. Say, do you remember Slim? Travels for a clothing house in Cincinnati, and they call him Slim because he's so fat that every time he turns around he meets himself coming back. He's all to the good, that boy is, and such a cut-up. Slim knows more "look out, there's a lady over there" stories than any other drummer in the business. Nick goes after the gilt things for a hardware house in Columbus, and he knows everybody in the world, bar no one living. Nick has only one trouble: he will paddle after the ponies. Whenever he makes a town where there's a pool room, his expense account gets fat and beefy, and Nick begins to worry for fear he may win something. He won $12 in Cleveland once, and he spent $218 at a boozologist that night, getting statistics on how it happened. Todd Stone cuts ice for a match factory in Newark, and he's the life of a small party. Todd's main hold is to creep into the reading room of a Rube hotel after the chores are done of an evening and throw salve at the come-ons. Todd tells them that their town is the brightest spot on the map, and they warm up to him and want to buy him sarsaparilla and root beer. Then, when he gets them stuck on themselves, he sells them matches. "Pipe the gang to quarters and all rubber," said Slim, about half an hour after the train pulled out. In the seat ahead of us, a somewhat demure-looking proposition in rainbow rags had been sampling the scenery ever since we started. We had all given her the glad glance, but she was very much cold storage, so we passed it up. As Slim spoke, the proposition was joined by a young chap with a loose face who had been out in the smoking room working faithfully on one of those pajama panella cigars that bite you on the ringer if you show the least sign of fear. Just then the train stopped for a few minutes, and we were put wise to the fact that it was an incurable case of bride and groom.
"Oh, Boozy is back to his birdie,"
said the brand new wife.
"Did Boozy like his smoky wokey?"
Boozy opened a bunch of grins and sat down while wifey patted his cheek and cooed.
"Is'm's glad to get back to 'ittle wifey pifey."
Nick Dalrymple and Ted Stone began to scream inwardly, and Slim was chuckling like a pet porpoise.
"Sweetie mustn't be angry with Petey, but Sweetie is sitting on Petey's 'ittle hand,"
said the bride, whereupon Todd exploded, and Slim began to grab for his breath. A Dutch brewer and his wife sat right ahead of Boozy and Bertie, and every once in a while the old hop puncher would turn around and beam benignly over the gold rims at the bride.
"Boozy must snuggy-wuggy up closer to his cozy and squeeze her 'ittle arm. No, not her waist. You naughty, naughty."
The brewer was back at the bride with another gold rim goo-goo when his wife got nervous and cut in.
"Is I'd you turn your face to see some dingus?" she snapped,
and the foam builder ducked to the window and began to eat scenery. Dalrymple was almost out. Todd was under the seat, sparring for wind. Slim was giving an imitation of a coal barge in a heavy sea, and the rest of the passengers were in various stages of hiccups to convulsions.
Is Boozy comfy with his itty weeny teeny birdie?
Chirped the bride. Boozy is so happy with his Izzy Wizzy, gurgled the husband. How's my ittle girly whirly?
Oh, she's such a happy wappy ittle thing,
giggled the dotty dame, pinching her piggy's ear, whereupon the brewer tried to hand the bride another gasoline gaze, but the old lady caught him with the goods.
Is I'd to my face you go behind my back to make googly eyes at someone, yes?
She growled, and in a minute the brewer's brow was busy with the window pane.
Sweetie looks at Petey, and Sweetie sees the Petey's petty face is getting sunburned, so it is,
Cock-cooed Mrs. Daffy.
And Sweetie has a good mind to tiss him too.
They opened a newspaper, crawled under cover, and began to bite each other on the chin. Go as far as you like, said Slim. Then he went down and out. The man who helped to make Weehawken famous had his head out the window watching for an ice wagon, and Mrs. Brewer was industriously muttering,
Du bist ein Narr, du bist ein Narr.
Just then the train pulled out and saved our lives. Nick, Todd, Slim, and I went over near the water cooler to rest up, and in a minute the three of them were fanning each other with fairy tales about the goods they sold. I'll back these three boys to dream longer than any other drummers on the track. It's a pipe that they can sell bills to each other all day and never wake up. Slim turned the gas on to the limit about hypnotizing a Johnny Wanamaker merchant prince in Pikesville, Indiana, to the extent of $200 for open-work socks, farmer size, and Todd Stone sent his balloon up by telling us how he sold the Siegel Coopers of Bugsport, Iowa, $300 worth of Panama hats for horses. The Hot Air Association was in full session when Buck Jones caroomed over from the other end of the car and weighed in with us. Buck is a sweller. He thinks he strikes 12 on all occasions, but his clock is all to the bad. Buck isn't a drummer. Nay, nay, take back your gold. He'll look you straight in the eye and tell you he's a traveling salesman. Nix on the drummer. I think Buck sells canned shirtwaists for the Shine brothers. Buck's wife and a 3-year-old were traveling with him, but he wasn't giving it out through a megaphone. Buck is one of those goose-headed guys who begin to scratch gravel and start in to make a killing every time they see a pretty girl. Across the aisle sat 2 pet canaries from Plainfield, New Jersey. They were members of the Soubrette Stinging Society, and they were en route to the West to join the Bunch of Birds Burlesque Company. Their names were Millie and Tilly, and they wore Floridora hats and did a sister act that contained more bad grammar than an East Side pinochle game. Millie was fully aware that she could back Deuce off the map, and Tilly was ready to bet a week's salary that she could make Barnhart feel like she was out in the storm we had day before yesterday. Slim called them the Roast Beef Sisters, rare and well done. In a minute, the casters on Buck's neck began to turn. Slim put us wise with a wink, so we lit the fire and began to cook it up. Buck's heart was warming for the birds in the gilded cage. The real caboo, said Slim. It's a plain case of Appomattox. The war is over and they are yours, Buck. Buck turned a few more bolts into his twinkling lamps. Lower your mainsail, Buck, and drop alongside. You've made the landing, suggested Nick. Buck began to feel his necktie and play patty cake with a little bald spot on the top of his head. Stop the hansom and get out. You're at your corner, said Todd. The sweet dreams across the way were giving Buck the glorious eye roll. and he felt that dinner was ready. "Hang up your hat, Buck, and gather the myrtle with Mary," I chipped in. Then Buck bounced over and began to show Milly and Tilly what a handsome brute he was at close quarters. He sat on the arm of the seat and steamed up. In less than a minute he crowded the information on them that he was a millionaire who had escaped from Los Angeles, California, and he was just going to put them both in grand opera when his 3-year-old toddled down the aisle and grabbed him by the coat tail.
Papa, Mama wants you to get my bottle of milk.
"Stung!" shrieked Slim. "Back to the nursery," howled Todd, and then as Buck crawled away to home and Mother, we let out a yell that caused the conductor to think the train had struck a Wild West show. During the rest of the trip Buck was nailed to his seat. Every time he tried to use the elastic in his neck, the wife would burn him with a hard, cold glitter. The roast beef sisters seemed to be all carved up about something or other. We were back to the shop selling things again when Sledgeheimer fluttered down among us. The boys call him Putty because he's the next thing to a pain. He's such a stingy loosener that he looks at you with one eye, so's not to waste the other. If you ask Sledgeheimer what time it is, he takes off 4 minutes as his commission for telling you. "Barnes," said Sledgeheimer, "do you smoke?" It was a knockout. In the annals of the road no one could look back to the proud day when Sledgeheimer had coughed. Once, so the legend runs, he gave a porter a nickel, but it was afterwards discovered that Sledgeheimer was asleep and not responsible at the time, so the porter gave it back. Sledgeheimer tried to collect 3 cents interest for the time the porter kept the nickel, and the conductor had to punch his mileage and his nose before he'd let go. And now Sledgeheimer had asked Barnes if he smoked. Slim was pale but game. "Sometimes," he answered. "Do you like a good cigar?" queried Sledgeheimer. We looked for the engine to hit a cow any minute now. "Sure," said Slim, weak all over. "Well," said Sledgeheimer, "here is my brother-in-law's card. He makes dot glass vido cigar on 6th Avenue. Give him a call and mention my name. He will be glad to see you yet." Then Sledgeheimer went away back and sat down. The laugh was on Slim, so he got busy with the button.
End of chapter 2. Chapter 3 of Down the Line with John Henry by Hugh McHugh. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. John Henry in Bohemia.
"Boys, let me put you wise. If you want to keep off the griddle, don't ever try to show your shy little lady friend how the birdies sing in Bohemia. You'll get stung if you do. For the past 6 months, Clara Jane has been handing out hints that she'd like to have me take her down the line and let her, listen to the band in one of those real devilish New York restaurants. She intimated that she'd like to sit in the grandstand and hold the watch on those who are going the pace that kills. She wanted to know if I thought she could toy with a tenderloin steak in a careless cafe without getting the call down from Uncle William. Clara Jane's Uncle William hands out the lesson leaflets in Sunday school and wrestles the golden rule to a finish every Sabbath. During the week, he conducts a fire sale. I told her I thought she could, and she was pleased. I'm just crazy to take lunch sometime among the Bohemians, she gurgled. I told her I thought she'd have a happier time if we tramped down to the tunnel and butted in among the Italians just as the 12 o'clock whistle blew. Then she threw both lamps at me good and hard. Clara Jane spent the summer once at Sag Harbor, and she's been a subscriber for the Young Ladies' Home Companion. But outside of these, her young life has been devoid of excitement. A few days ago, I took her to the matinee at the New York, where you have to pinch off only 50 cents, and then you're entitled to slosh around in parlor furniture and eat up about $8 worth of comedy. That New York thing is immense, believe me. Everything else has faded away. After the show, we thought we'd pat the pave for a few blocks, and who should we run into but Bud Phillips? Bud belongs to the Grand Lodge of Good Fellows. So far as I can size him up, the good fellow puts in 12 hours a day trying to stab himself to death with gin rickeys, and the other 12 are devoted to yelling for help and ice water. This is not a tap on the door. Nix on the knock. It isn't my cue to aim the hammer. When it comes to falling off the water wagon, I can do a bit of a specialty in grand and lofty tumbling that gets a loud hand from all the members of the High Tide Association. So nix on the knock. His father cut out the breathing business about 2 years ago and left Bud $100,000 and a long dry spell on the inside. Bud has been in the lake ever since. As you were, said Bud. Why, it's John Henry. Touch thumbs, old pal. And then in a side speech he wanted to know what troupe the soubrette was cutting up with. If Clara Jane had heard him, my finish would have hopped over the fence then and there. But she didn't, so I introduced them, and quietly tipped Bud off to the fact that it will be a case of wedding bells when Willie gets a wad. Be nice, be nice. And Bud woke up to the occasion. You two that carry all, he said. I'll float you down to Muttheimer's and we'll get busy with the beans. He's ought to cough for a few cookies, I explained to Clara Jane. I never heard of Muttheimer's before, said Clara Jane on the side. You luck has given you a throwdown, I said. But I do hope it's Bohemian, she sighed. Sure, I said. I hated to break her heart. Muttheimer's is one of those eateries where the waiters look wise because they can't speak English. If you ask them a question, they bark at you in German. It's supposed to be Bohemian because there's sawdust on the floor and the flies wear pajamas and say, "Posit!" before falling off in the stuff that you swallowed today and taste tomorrow. Bud bunches his hits on the bell, and the low forehead has a Fitzsimmons hug on the order when Ike Minson-Pinstein crawls into the harbor and drops anchor at our table. I don't know how Ike ever pressed close enough to get on Bud's staff. Ike is a lazy loosener. When the waiter deals out the check, Ike is the busiest talker in the bunch. Whenever he passes a bank, he takes off his hat and walks on his toes. He's the sort of a Sim Dempsey who sheds in growing tears every time anybody spends money in his neighborhood. He hates to see it wasted, and that's why his whiskers peep out of his face and worry the wind. But then, a good fellow doesn't have to go to sea to gather barnacles. I spoke his name fast when I introduced Ike to Clara Jane, but she was busy trying to live a swift life by ordering a seltzer lemonade, so it didn't make much difference anyway. What is he? She whispered after a bit. A painter? Oh, he's a painter all right, I said, when someone leads him up to a tub. Watercolors or oil? She asked. Oh, I said, fusel oil. Has he ever done any good thing? Said she. Yes, I said, Bud Phillips. Oh, I'm enjoying this so much. Who is the man with the fawn-like eyes and the long hair at the other table? She whispered. He was the night watchman of the apartment house next door, but I gave her an easy speech to the effect that he was Bill Beethoven, a grandson of old man Beethoven, who wrote the Wedding March and Ma Rainbow Coon, and father was a gentleman when mother was not near, and several other gems. She thought she was in Bohemia and having the time of her life, so I let her dream. In the meantime, Bud was busy trying to put out the fire in the well Ike used for a neck. Every time a waiter looked over at our table, Bud's roll would blaze up. Clara Jane concluded she broadened out a bit on art and the old masters, so she asked Ikey if he'd like Rembrandt. Ikey looked at her out of the corner of one eye and said, "Much obliged, but I'm up to here now." Then he went to sleep. Bud was beginning to see double. Every once in a while he'd stop trying to whistle "Sally My Hot Tamale," and he'd look over at Clara Jane and hand her a sad, sad smile. Then he'd press money into the waiter's hand and wait for his music cue. Clara Jane had about decided that Bohemia was a way up stage, but I wouldn't let go. I wanted her to get the lesson of her life, and that's where my finish began to get busy. Tom Barclay waltzed into the subway, saw me, and in a minute he was making the break of his life. "Well, hello, John Henry," said Tom. "Say, I saw her today, and she's immense. You've got a great eye, old man." I tossed off a few wicked winks on that great eye of mine, but Tom went right along to the funeral. "Lizzie B. is a peach, John Henry. You've got the eye for the good girls, all right, he chortled. Clara Jane began to freeze. I felt like a boiled potato in the hands of an Irish policeman. "She's every bit to the good, old man." Tom turned it on again. "She makes all the other birds chatter in the cage, and her feet, did you ever see such feet?" I looked at Clara Jane's face, but there was no light in the window for me. "You certainly picked out a warm proposition when you put your arms around Lizzie B., and I'm your friend for life for hauling me up to the chariot with you. What'll you have?" croaked Tom. 32 bars rest," I whispered hoarsely. "Cut it all out." "Cut out nothing," said the prize idiot. "We'll drink to Lizzie B. What'll your lady friend have?" When Clara Jane arose, she was a mass of icicles. "Mr. John Henry, will you have the kindness to escort me to a car?" she said, giving me the glittering gig lamps. "Then you may return and discuss your affairs of the heart at your leisure." "Stung!" said Bud, bringing his hand down on the table so vigorously that Ikey woke up and ordered another highball. Me to the Badlands. It took me 3 mortal hours to convince her that Tom was only talking about a horse. Hereafter, when Clara Jane yearns for something swift, I'll take her down and let her watch the trolley cars go by.
End of chapter 3. Chapter 4 of Down the Line with John Henry by Hugh McHugh. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. John Henry and the Hotel Clerk.
Key Barclay, Jim Wilkinson, and I were leaning over the counter, talking to his nobs, the hotel clerk, when Dan the dyspeptic squeezed up and began to let a peep out of him about the pie he had eaten for dinner. "Calm yourself," said smiling Steve, "and tell me where it bit you." Steve has been throwing keys at the wall for some time, and he knows how to burn the beefers. "Bit me, snarled the old chap. "Nothing of the kind, sir. I want you to know, sir, that your pie isn't fit to eat, sir." "Cut it out," suggested Steve. "Cut it out, sir? How can I cut it out when I haven't eaten it, sir? It's an outrage, and I shall leave this hotel tomorrow," said Dan. "With the exception of $32.72, balance due, that will be all about from you," said Steve. "I'll see the proprietor," said the old fellow, moving along with a face on him like an interrupted beef stew. "We get it good and plenty every day," said Steve, and just then Skate Peters grabbed the book and burned his John Hancock on it. I knew his name was Skate because it looked like one on the register. "Bath?" queried Steve. "Only during a hot wave," said Skate. Steve went to the ropes, but he came up smiling as usual. "American or European?" asked Steve. "Neither," said Skate. "Don't you see I'm from Jersey City?" "Going to be with us long?" inquired Steve. "Say, bub, you're hell'n all on asking questions, now ain't you?" answered Skate. "You just pushed me into a stall and locked the gate. I'm tired." "Front, show the gentleman to 49, said Skate, sidestepping to avoid punishment. Then Sweet William, the boy drummer, hopped into the ring for the next round. Willie peddles pickles for the fun he gets out of it. It is Willie's joy and delight to get a ginger ale bun and recite Ostler Joe. When trained down to 95 flat, Willie can get up and beat the clapper off Curfew Shall Not Ring Tonight. When Willie gets a stranglehold on Sheridan's Ride, you can hear horses galloping outside. It's the rest of the community getting out of harm's way. "Any mail?" inquired Willie. All the mail that Willie ever gets is a postal card from the pickle factory, and every 2 weeks asking him if the people along his route have all lost their appetites. "No literature for you," Steve answered. "Strange," said Willie. "My lady friends are very remiss, aren't they?" "Yes, it looks like they were out to drop you behind the piano," said Steve. Willie tore off a short rabbit laugh and then inquired what time the next train left for New York. The pickle factory expects Willie to make Pocomoke City, Squashtown Junction, and Nubbinsville before next Sunday. So he tossed the train gag out just to show Steve that he knows there's a place called New York. "At 7:45 over the D, L, and Q," said Steve. "What's the next?" inquired Willie. "At 8:10 over the H, B, and N," Steve answered. "Which gets there first?" Willie asked. "The engineer," sighed Steve. "Oh, you droll chap," said the pickle pusher. "Give me some toothpicks." Then Sweet William went over to the big window, burrowed into a chair, stuck his feet up on the brass rail, ate toothpicks, and thought he was it. When I get back to Steve, he was dealing out the cards to a lady from Reading, Pennsylvania, and Key and Jim had ducked to the billiard room. Her husband had been up in the air with a bum automobile, and when he came down, he was several sections shy. They found a monkey wrench embedded in his left shoulder, which he couldn't remember using when he tried to fix the machine. She was traveling for his health. "My room is too near the elevator," she informed Steve. "I can give you a very nice room on the 3rd floor. Front, show the lady. Same size room?" "Yes, madam." "Same colored carpet on the floor?" "I believe it has." "Front, show the lady. Southern exposure?" "Yes, madam, it's at the end of the hall." "I want a room near the elevator. That's always the way in these hotels. One can never get just what one wants. At the end of the hall indeed." And with this she gave Steve the society sting with both eyes and flounced out. Steve bit the end off a penholder and said the rest internally. Just then a couple of troopers trailed in. They were with a Bandit's Pride company, and the way had been long and weary. "What have you got, double?" asked the villain of the piece. $2 and up," said Steve. "Nothing better?" inquired Low Comedy. He was making a crack, but nobody caught him. $4 with bath," Steve suggested. "Board?" asked the villain. "Nothing but the sleeps and a fresh cake of soap," said Steve. "Ring down," Low Comedy put in. "Why, we lived a whole week in Pittsburgh for less than that." "You can turn the same trick here if you carry your own coke and sleep in the park," said Steve. "What's the name of this mint?" asked the villain. Steve told him. "To the towpath," said Barrett McCready. "We're outside the lifelines. We thought it was the liverwurst hotel where they throw things at your appetite for $1 a day, double. To the left, wheel. Forward, march." And once more the drama was on its way. As low comedy turned proudly on his heel, he threw upon the counter a printed card. Steve had it framed and glued to the wall next day. It read as follows: Hotel rules. Help yourself. Rule 1. We cash no checks drawn on Papa. He's a dead one. Rule 2. Eat all our booze you want to, but go elsewhere and select your snakes. Rule 3. Don't call the waitress by your first name. She's liable to spoil your appetite. Rule 4. Guests who desire to have nightmare will find the harness in the restaurant, so back up. Rule 5. To prevent guests from carrying fruit from the table, we'll have no fruit. We're lucky to have the table. Rule 6. If you feel tired, go way back and sit down. Rule 7. In case of fire, jump out the window and turn to the left. Rule 8. Breakfast from 4 to 3, dinner from hand to mouth, and supper from what's left over. Rule 9. Hug as many highballs as you please, but don't wave the red flag in the office. You might disturb Harold Spotwood, the room clerk. He was out late last night. Rule 10. If you don't like your room, kick the bellboy. Apply at the office for spiked shoes. Rule 11. If you don't see what you want, ask for it, and you'll get it, good and hard. Rule 12. Ask the barkeeper to let you have one of our justly celebrated high tides. It will do you good. Rule 13. Try our boneless potato salad. Apply to the night watchman. Rule 14. All the shines are not in the barber shop. Lie down, Fido. Rule 15. That will be about all from you.
End of chapter 4. Chapter 5 of Down the Line with John Henry by Hugh McHugh. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. John Henry and the Benzine Buggy.
A cross-country dub named Montrose has been doing the shine specialty around Clara Jane lately. He began to call evenings and bring a bunch of ready-grown flowers with him as big as a haystack. Then he'd spread around the parlor and tell her how he won the long-distance running jump in the '01 Yale class. As you approached him from the front, the first name you saw was Clarence. Clarence Edgerton Montrose. Wouldn't that slap you? I don't think Clara Jane considered him the real kittens, but he could fast talk and use long words, and she found him pleasant company. She said she loved to sit and shade her eyes with the $8 fan I gave her and listen to Clarence Edgerton Montrose while he discoursed about Palestine and the Holy Land. If he was ever there, he went in a hack. That's the trouble with some of those college come-outs. The professors beat them over the head with a geography, and then as soon as they get a crowd around, they begin to go to the places that struck them hardest. As an honest, hard-working man, it was my duty to put the boots to Edgerton and run him down the lane as far as the eye could see. So I framed up Clarence's finish with much attention to detail. I looked over Clara Jane's dates ahead and found that Clarence had rented the house for a Wednesday matinee, so I hired one of those horseless carriage things and pulled up in front of the windows just about the time I thought his feathers would be playing the overture. I knew that Clara Jane would cancel the contract with the mutt that mixed in just as soon as she saw the automobile snap. I figured that the picture entitled The True Lover's Departure in the Dream Wagon would put a crimp in Clarence about the size of a barn door. It was my third or fourth time behind the lever of the busy barouche, but I was wise that you pulled the plug this way when you wanted it to go ahead, and you shoved it back when you wanted it to stop. But when it came to benzine buggies, I felt that my education was complete. I was George Gazaza. the real Rolando, when I pulled up in front of my lady's front gate. My market price was $18,000 a square inch. In 6 minutes by the watch, Clara Jane was down and in the kerosene caravan. Clarence hadn't arrived. Somebody must have put him next, but I knew where he lived, and I figured it out that after we came back from Lonely Lane, I'd send the landau around and around the block he camped until I made him dizzy. Clara Jane was the feature of the game. She was the limit in ladies' dress goods. For a chaser, she wore one of those feather boas that feel cool because they look so warm. Well, I turned the horseless gag into the shell road and cut loose. We were doing about 43 miles an hour, and the birdies were singing on the way. Clarence Edgerton Montrose was working in shaft number 3 back in the mines. My lady friend told me so. She was having the time of her life. I was her candy boy for sure. Just then something snapped and the machine started for Portland, Maine on the basis of 1 mile in 8 seconds. Clara Jane grabbed me around the neck and I grabbed the lever. "The eccentric has buckled the thingamajig," I yelled, pushing the lever over to stop the carryall. The thing gave me the horse laugh, jumped over a telegraph pole, bit its way through a barbed wire fence, and then started down the road at the rate of 2,000,000 miles a minute. "Why don't you stop it?" screamed my lady friend. "I'll be the goat. What's the answer?" I said, clawing the lever and ducking the low bridges. We met a man on a bicycle, and the last I saw of him as we whizzed by, he had found a soft spot in a field about 4 blocks away, and he was going into it head first. We kept his bicycle and carried it along on our smokestack. I couldn't stop the thing to save my life. Every time I yanked the lever, the snap would let a chortle out of its puzzle department and fly 400 feet straight through the air. We were headed for an old ash heap, and my market price had gone down to 3 cents a ton. "Don't jump!" I yelled to my lady friend, but the wind whisked the first half of my sentence away. Clara Jane gathered her skirts in a bunch and did a flying leap out of the crazy cab. She landed right in the middle of that heap of fresh ashes, and she made good. All I could see was a great gray cloud as I pushed on to the next stand. About a half-mile further down the road, the machine concluded to turn into a farmyard and give the home folks a treat. It went through a window in the barn, out through a skylight, did the hula dance over the lawn, and then fell into the well and stayed there, panting as though its little gas engine heart would break. When I limped back to Clara Jane, the storm signals were flying. She was away out on the ice. The feather boa looked like a hawser on a canal boat, and the ashes had changed the pattern of her dress goods. We were stingy talkers on the road home. It will take me 2 years to square myself. Hereafter, me to the trolley. Me to the saucy stagecoach when I'm due to gallop away and away. No more benzine buggies for yours sincerely. Never again for the bug house barouche. Not me. I have only one consolation. The chap we pried off the bicycle was Clarence Edgerton Montrose. It will take him about 3 years and 2 months to find all the spots that foolish wagon knocked off him. Meantime, I hope to be Clara Jane's sugar buyer again.
End of chapter 5.
Chapter 6 of Down the Line with John Henry by Hugh McHugh. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. John Henry at the Musicale.
Did you ever get ready and go to a musicale? Isn't it the velvet goods? They pulled off one at the Jack Frothingham's last Wednesday evening, and I had to walk up and down the aisle with the rest of the bunch. Mind you, I like Jack, so this is no secret conclave of the Anvil Association. Only, I wish to put him wise that when he gives his next musicale, my address is Forest Avenue. in the woods. When I reached Jack's house, the Burnish brothers were grabbing grouchy music out of a guitar that didn't want to give up, and the mad revel was on. The Burnish brothers part their hair in the middle, and always do the Washington Post March on their mandolins for an encore. If Mr. Sousa ever catches them, there'll be a couple of shined cord squeezers away to the bad. When the Burnish brothers took a bow and backed off, we were all invited to listen to a soprano solo by Miss Imogen Lukewarm. Somebody went around and locked the doors, so I made up my mind to die game. A foolish friend once told Imogen she could sing, so she went out and bought up a bunch of tra-la-las and began to beat them around the parlor. When Imogen sings, she makes faces at herself. If she needs a high note, she goes after like she was calling the dachshund into dinner. Imogen sang "Sleep, Sweetly Sleep," and then kept us awake with her voice. After Imogen crept back to her cave, we had the first treat of the evening, and the shock was so sudden it jarred us. Uncle Mill came out and quivered a violin obbligato entitled "The Lost Sheep in the Mountain," and it was all there is. Uncle Mill was the only green spot in the desert. When he gathered the gourd up under his chin and allowed the bow to tiptoe over the bridge, you could hear the nightingale calling to its mate. I wanted to get up a petition asking Uncle Mill to play all the evening and make us all happy, but Will Bruce wouldn't let me. Will said he wasn't feeling very well and he wanted to hear the rest of the program and feel worse. He got his wish. The next thing we had was Sybil, the illusionist. Sybil did a lot of moldy tricks with cards, and every few minutes she fell down and sprained her sleight of hand. Sybil was a polish for sure. Then Swift McGee, the boy monologist, flung himself in the breach and told a bunch of Bixby's. It was a cruel occasion. Swift had an idea that when it came to cracking Mary Boo-Boos, he could pull Lou Dockstader off the horse and leave him under the fence. As a monologist, Swift thought he had George Fuller Golden halfway across the bay, and Fred Niblo was screaming for help. Swift often told himself that he could give Marshall P. Wilder 6 surefires and beat him down to the wire. Swift is one of those low foreheads who write their own stuff and say, "I done it." After Swift had talked the audience into a chill, he pushed on and left us with a stone bruise on our memories. Then we had Rufus Nelson, the parlor prestidigitator. Rufus was a bad boy. He cooked an omelet in a silk hat, and when he gave the hat back to Ed Walker, the poached eggs fell out and cuddled up in Ed's hair. Rufus apologized and said he'd do the trick over again if someone else would lend him a hat, but there was nothing doing. When the contralto crawled under the ropes and began to tell us that the bells in the village rang ding-ding-dong, I was busy watching a goo-goo bird. Did you ever spot one of those glance-givers? This chap's name was Llewellyn Joyce, and he considered himself a perfect hellion. He thought all he had to do was to roll his lamps at a lassie, and she was off the slate. Llewellyn loved to sit around at the Musicale and burn the belle of the ball with his goo-goo eyes. Llewellyn needed a swift slap. That's what he needed. Next, we had the non-Imperial Quartet, and they were the boys that could eat up the close harmony. They sang "Love, I Am Lonely" from start to finish without stopping to call the waiter. Then we had Clarissa Coldslaw in select recitations. She was all the money. Clarissa grabbed Hamlet's soliloquy between her pearly teeth and shook it to death. She got a half Nelson on Poe's Raven and put it out of the business. Then she gave an imitation of the balcony scene from Romeo and Juliet. If Juliet talked like that dame did, no wonder she took poison. But when she let down her hair and started in to give us a mad scene, me to the sand dunes. It was a case of flee as a bird with yours respectably. Those Musicale things would be aces if the music didn't set them back.
End of chapter 6.
Chapter 7 of Down the Line with John Henry by Hugh McHugh. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. John Henry on golf.
Hereafter, golf is the game for Gillis. Me for the niblick and the brassy fine. Billy Baldwin, Harry Ford, and Eddie Bartlett took me out last summer and put me wise to the whole layout. In less than an hour, I could play the game better than Doolin, and he's the man that made it. Golf has all the other games slapped to a sit-down. I know it because I played it once, and Billy told me that as soon as a few Scotch thistles sprouted on my shins, I'd be the real rent-a-caboo. Harry told me I could drive good enough to own a hack, and Eddie thought I was the likeliest sidestepper that ever did a grass-chopping specialty. The only drawback they found was that I didn't hit the ball. It's immense for the chess measurement to have the bunch hand you out the sab spiel. Believe me. I took my lady friend out Westchester way last week, and on the road I was reckless Robert with the big talk. It's a habit with me to go up and butt the ceiling every time my lady friend is near enough to listen. Most of us young guys are gushers with loud language when the best and only is in the building. How do we like to gather the gab and hand out hints to the heroine that she's gazing on the greatest ever? When Clara Jane asked me if I knew the game, I told her that I used to room with the man that built the first links. When she asked me his name, I told her it was McDougal, because that's the name of the head waiter that helps to spend my money. She asked me if I knew what a lofter is, and I said, "Sure, I eat them for breakfast every morning." When we reached Westchester, we met a society duck named Lionel von Hamburg. I think his father invented the hamburger steak. Lionel was all to the best. He was Finnegan the fine boy for sure. One of those tart little redcoats squeezed his shape, and around his neck he had a pink stock that was waiting for a chance to choke him. My lady friend met this Gilly once at a bean soiree, and she was his evening star. They sat on the stairs together and put a kink in the caramels. When the gong sounded for the ice cream that night, Lionel had dipped her out a tubful, and he was sure she liked him for his boyish ways. So on this occasion, it was Lionel's play to give me the low tackle and claim the calico. But I'm something of a Mr. Fox himself on rare occasions, and I couldn't see Lionel doing a two-step through the farmlands with my Esmeralda, not through the opera glasses. Clara Jane introduced me to his pinkness, and he invited us to the clubhouse to throttle our thirsts. I ordered a Ricky. Clara Jane called for lemonade, and Lionel's guess was a pail of Vichy in milk. When the suds rolled up, I gave the Vichy stuff the sad eye, and Lionel caught the gaze. I could see that he wanted to backpedal right then, but he waited until the next round, and then he waded out among the high boys. It was the bluff of his life. His limit on bug bitters was imported ginger ale with a piece of lime in it. When he was out roistering and didn't care what became of him, he would tell the bartender to add a dash of phosphates. But now he made up his mind to splash around in the tide waters just because the lady was looking on. Lionel felt that the future was at stake, and he must cut out the sawdust extracts and get busy with the grown-up booze. After the first highball, Lionel began to chatter and mention money. The mockingbirds were singing down on the old bayou, and he began to give Clara Jane the loving leer. She grew a bit uneasy, and wanted to start the paddle wheels, but I signaled to the waiter because I wished her to see the society slob at his best. At first, he insisted upon dragging out a basket of Runart, and he wanted to order rubber boots so we could slosh around in it. But I steered him off, and he went all the way up the hill and picked out another high fellow. When the second high was under cover, he reached over and patted Clara Jane on the hand. He wanted to lead her away to Paris and show her everything that money could buy. When she gave him the "Sir" gag, he apologized and said he didn't mean Paris, he meant the Pan American. Then he smiled feverishly and opened a package of hiccups. When Clara Jane and I moved out on the links, Lionel was watching the floor and trying to pick out a spot that didn't go round and round. His chips were all in, and he was Simon with the souse for sure. Clara Jane said, "What a ridiculous person!" But what she meant was that would be about all from Lionel. Then we chartered a couple of caddy boys and started in to render a few choice selections on the clubs. My caddy boy's name was Mike, and he looked the part. The first crack out of the box, I lost my ball, and Mike found it under his left eye. I gave him a quarter to square myself, and he said I could hit him on the other eye for 10 cents more. I made the first hole in 26 and felt that there was nothing more to live for. Clara Jane could have made it in 84, but she used up her nerve watching a cow in the lot about 2 miles away. My lady friend is a quitter when it comes to cows. Then we decided to stop playing and walk around the links just so we could say that we had seen most of the United States of America. Out near the 5th hole, we met young Mill Roberts and Frank Genby. They were playing a match for 60 cents a side, and they were 2 busy boys, all right. Mill had his sleeves rolled up to show the mosquito bites on his muscles, and Frank was telling himself how he missed the last bunker. I asked Mill what time it was, and he told me 3 up and 4 to play. I suppose that was Central Time. I handed Frank a few bars of polite conversation, but he gave me the Frostburg face. Did you ever have one of those real players pass you out the goldfish glare? You for the snowstorm when you get it, believe me. Then Mill and Frank dove in the mud clan, cooked a pill, placed the ball on it, slapped it in the slats, gave us the jury day, and were on their way. It must be awful to play for money. At the 7th hole, we found Jake Roberts plowing the side of a hill with his niblick. He said he lost a ball there one day last summer, and he wanted it back because it belonged to a set. Jake said he went to 3 and 4 with that ball once, but the folks wouldn't believe him till he showed them the ball. When I introduced him to Clara Jane, he invited her to join the hunting party, and intimated that I'd enjoy the new mown scenery further down the line. I whipsawed him with a whistling specialty entitled, "Why Don't You Get a Lady of Your Own?" and he promised to be good. After we trailed over the mountains, through 7 farms, across 3 rivers, up the valley and down the railroad, we finally reached the end of the links and took the steamer back to Mother. Clara Jane says golf would be a great game if it wasn't so far from home. Yours till the bench breaks, believe me. John Henry.
End of Chapter 7. End of Down the Line with John Henry by Hugh McHugh.